Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel today for another review. Will and I today are going to be reviewing the new series, The Queen of Villains, which is coming to Netflix September 19th. This series is 5 episodes long. They're all over an hour each. So we're talking about hour and 5, hour and 10, and it follows the story of the Joshi and honestly just wrestling phenomena in Dump Matsumoto through the period of 1980 to about 1988. So we see essentially the story of young Kaoru Matsumoto ultimately becoming the proclaimed queen of villains. So first thing I want to start off by saying is I think coming into the series, whether you know who Dump is, whether you are a pro wrestling fan or not, I think overall it's a solid series to watch. I think it's one of those type of things where, especially with Netflix, when things tend to trend, if you somehow, some way land on this, I think it's totally worth your 5+ hours or such binge watch to learn about a story, especially during this time of Japan. That was just nothing but a cultural phenomenon. And while there is a lot of significance about Dump's story and origins in Japan, I think this really was something that just revolutionized the world of pro wrestling. So I think it's a super good watch. I can't wait to talk more about performances and whatnot. But want to hand it off to you, Will. Now that we seen it all now, where you at with it?
I'm still digesting it somewhat, but from the moment we saw the first trailer drop a few weeks back, the big thing that jumped out at me is how extravagant the production was, especially the arena settings, where I was like, oh, they're putting some effort into this. They're spending some money here because everything was looking really sharp and like really well produced is what first jumped out at me. And it's bridging that like 70s and 80s era of wrestling, which have a very specific, unique aesthetic, especially if we're talking about Japanese, Joshi wrestling here specifically. It's a very specific look there and sound. And I think my biggest takeaway right out of the gate was just the aesthetic of everything. They nailed it so well, just the arenas and the matches. And there is extensive time spent on the matches compared to a lot of other wrestling dramatic movies and TV shows we've seen. This might have the most actual runtime in the ring out of all of them. I was surprised how much time was spent like just on the in-ring portion of things in it. But yeah, there's a lot to get into here. I'm pleasantly surprised, I think, is where I'm at.
Yeah, and this is a spoiler free review. Obviously, I'll hint at some things and kind of get you hyper prepared for things to expect. But yeah, I'm not going to wait any longer. I got to talk about our lead here in Yuriyan Retriever, who I just recently got a chance to meet on actually. And she has a comedy background. She does some acting, and she's also a fashion icon. I gotta tell you, just that alone, you can understand the versatility here. And she nails this performance as Dump. Even to the point that we have Dump on the record saying how moved she was by the performance. So, one way or another, the casting director here, this right here should have earned the check alone, because I think when you typically want to cast, especially in pro wrestling, we have seen recently that they're not just only looking inside the wrestling community, but they're actually looking at folks who's willing to get in there and learn the business, put these characters on and do them justice. And I got to tell you, from meeting Yuriyan and just how charismatic she is as a person, and even all of the tons of viral clips you'll see of her, again, seeing this fashion icon. So she even has like a sort of like persona around that as well too. There's not one day on this earth I would have said she would make a perfect Dump Matsumoto, but here we are. She nails this performance, and there's so many other folks I'm gonna talk about in a moment, but I gotta tell you that she carries this show to the point that I am truly excited to see what her next role is going to be. This was a very particular character to have to execute, because not only are you executing the person, the human, but the villain. And we had to feel something the entire time with this performance, because she wasn't always so confident. And at times, considering where she came from, you know, within the household and the family dynamics, we had to see the struggle before we could see the tyranny for 8 strong years in Japan, where she was revered in everywhere that she went,
and feared,
to the point that, like, you almost didn't think that there might have been any ounce of goodness in her. But also there's also a measure of understanding how she became who she was, and you kind of get behind that to an extent. So it's a fantastic performance, and I gotta say, from like the roller coaster of emotions, from this, it's obviously going to be moments that you cried. There's going to be moments that will inspire you. It's all on the backs of Yuriyan. She's just flat out fantastic performance here. And if this is the first time you've ever heard of her or seen her work, I definitely think one quick Google search and you're going to be like, wow, she has so much talent, and you're going to become a fan. So that's my first thing. I definitely want to talk about the performance. I know, Will, you wanted to talk about sort of the aesthetic of the film. You mentioned even slightly about the audio, because I will also say that the audio mixing certainly played the part, especially when it came down to some of the things that were happening in the ring. So overall, flat out, I say fantastic performance. The cast up and down the board. You have folks that just really makes this series work. Like, from our baby faces, which is our good guys, and to our other heels, you know, everybody shows up in a way. And I gotta give a quick shout out to some honorable mentions, and that's the refs.
The poor referees.
The poor referees. Like, you gotta like, I don't want to get too deep into the pro wrestling aspect of it, but like, the refs play a part in ensuring the organization of the matches. Understanding that the refs played the part in this series is almost to ensure that you just seen how violent things got, how chaotic things got, by way of the refs never being able to control what was happening in the ring, to the point that, like, they were not just a side component, they were a part of the presentation.
Yes.
And for what it's worth, the wrestling in the ring, the stunts, the choreography that has to happen in order for the series to work, every ref in this played their part. It's crazy that we're talking about the refs here, but that just shows you that every bit of attention to detail in this mattered. That being said, what else do you want to talk about, sir?
I like that you mentioned her background in comedy, because that definitely made me think of the early part of this show, where before we get to the wrestling, it's focused on, you know, her early years, the family aspect, what's going on at home, her living situation, which has all kinds of layers to it, her relationship with her sister, her mom, her dad, and just, you know, her discovery of wrestling and trying to find a way to dip her toe into that, which does not go smoothly, to say the least, but I think a lot of people out there will find that familiar as a coming of age story. And it's definitely a common story in wrestling, with people trying to find their way to break in, and how at the beginning things do not go well. It is a bumpy and rough road. And so we get a lot of that. So there's a lot of emotions in this thing. There's definitely, there's serious themes, and there's heartbreak, and there's violence, and there's blood, and there's gore. But there's also definitely some comedy in here.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just, you know, some pratfalls even, and just parts where you're just like, oh my God. There's definitely some hilarity to go along with the heaviness that is also present throughout these 5 episodes. And it's a heck of a balancing act they pulled off to have it all blend together so well throughout the entire narrative, I thought.
I totally agree. I wanted to mention too, Erika Karata, who is playing Chigusa, and who is our over the top babyface here. She
Right.
part of the Crush Girls. I mean, she's one of the most beloved wrestlers in this period, and that's alongside the Lioness Asuka. But I just want to say, and maybe I can make this statement about the two of them, but there's so much storytelling even within their eyes, because there's moments where we see sort of fear, but we see like even perseverance, this idea to never give up, to stay strong. Because for every wrestler that we mentioned in this era, and there's so many we could talk about here, there was a fight outside the ring before these women ever touched the ring, ever touched the square.
No doubt.
And we see the payoffs, because even again, when it talks about in pro wrestling, you always talk about the payoff in the storytelling, whether it's done at the pay-per-view or at the end of the match, whatever it is. But that's why pro wrestling is so closely tied to cinema, is because you kind of build stories and characters the same way. And for this, how they say life imitates art, I believe is how you say it.
There you go.
Yeah. So the fact that like there's so much that happens in your life. And I mean, I'm going to just be very frank and say there's not a lot of good men in Japan. Fathers are a lot of these fathers, in a very sinister way to say, a lot of these fathers have created these superstars, and that's not a good thing on their behalf. But the fact of the matter is that they get to come to pro wrestling, and this is where not only are they inspired by other women, which is really a beautiful thing right there, but also they find their voices. And they find themselves from households that didn't allow such. I mean, we're talking about violent household, a mass display of domestic violence, and so on. So that the fact that all of these women were able to come into the square circle to find themselves, to find their voices, and you still see some of the struggle within the ring, because at the end of the day, even though they found something where they can kind of exercise their craft, they're still battling what's at home or what they have to go home to. So you see so much emotions, even with our good guys, right in their eyes alone. Nothing's being said, but you understand the struggle. You understand what it took for them to get to this moment. And I again, just the little small details, the things that really made this work. And last thing I will say, like, while this is, you know, the semi-biographical drama that is focused around Dump, I will say that this was truly a special, as you said, a special era of Joshi wrestling, and a very special era for heels. So I think it is a focus of Dump, but it also is a focus of so many other wrestlers, and it's such a pivotal time in the world of pro wrestling at this. So they ensured that flowers were given to everything that made at this period, I would imagine, because it's a little before my time of understanding wrestling, besides just the performance aspect of it. But looking back now, understanding just how important, how this moment of pro wrestling, these women were trailblazers. You know, they were knocking down barriers. They did the unthinkable. They aired on television in a way that, in one way, you could say might have broke the system, but at the other day, it opened up a lot of doors here. So there's really a lot that you can take from this, though. But I got some other little critical things I'm gonna say in a second. But for you, give it back to you. What's some other things you want to touch on?
Yeah, I think another thing to focus on is that it's not necessary to be a wrestling fan to watch this. It's not necessarily that, even if you are a wrestling fan, to have a huge experience with Joshi wrestling. This is, as you were saying, it's before your time. This is also before my time, really, in a lot of ways, because the 70s part that they start in is definitely before me. And then the 80s, that was kind of, on the 90s women's scene, I kind of know. The 80s, I just know like a thumbnail version of. So like, I know the Beauty Pair, I know the Crush Gals, I know Dump Matsumoto, but by no means am I intricately familiar with any of this. And that's all fine and good. They do a great job of explaining everything and showing the whole development of everything, of the eras changing from the 70s into the 80s, and how they're going to ratchet things up to another level to stand out and raise things in a different manner. And also they get there, of course, you know, a lot of these, you know, wrestling dramas will have, you know, the training part and all that. Of course, in Japan, it's a little different because you get the dojo and you get the dojo life, which is very different since everyone's actually living there and forming bonds in the dojo 24 hours a day. And that's a key part of the show, especially in the second episode, where it really gets into, everything starts coming together and you really get to know everybody in the dojo system, which something we don't quite have here in the States to that extent, where everyone's like, no, you're here, you're all living together, you're gonna be bunking together, and this is how it's gonna be. So it's truly a peek into a different culture, even a different way of presenting pro wrestling.
Absolutely. Let me go down some of my things really quickly too. I also want to mention that in this period of wrestling, I think you can talk about how these women were pioneers to the sport, because we see how karate is introduced into it, and they were reluctant to it, but it became such a pivotal part in terms of the storytelling. So some of the moves that we take for granted that we see on a day-to-day, I feel like it was safe to say from this is that this might have been the origins of where it came from. And even little small things. And like, you know, a lot of folks may attest the sharpshooter coming from Bret Hart. This series will ensure you that you know exactly the origins of this move and why it was such a important part in Japanese wrestling as well too. I don't know if they proclaim what they did strong style, but you do see the brutality.
There's brutality. If anything, I was impressed how willing they were to go with the brutality and the depiction of brutality in this. There is no shying away from blood and some gore. So be prepared that as it goes on, there's, I would say, significant portions of some graphic nature to this series. So if you're familiar with Dump Matsumoto and thinking, oh, they probably can't, live up to, oh no, they're gonna go there and they're gonna double down and be like, okay, no, they all in on that. They knew what the material they were dealing with and presented it clearly in a manner that lives up to the real life version.
Correct, absolutely correct. Also, another department I really rarely give flowers to is not because I don't appreciate them, but because sometimes it's just overlooked. But I gotta honestly, I have to mention principal photography. The shots in this is insane. It's insane, some of the shots. And I will also talk about the folks who did all of the promotional material to make this even worth a draw just on that alone. So we talk about the trailers, the posters, the rock music is such a pivotal part in the storytelling, but also you get a small dose of that in the trailers. But like, it definitely sets a theme and a tone for a lot of the scenes as well too. But yeah, principal photography, because there's so many damn cool camera shots and edits in this, and there's something very particular I could talk about, but I'm just gonna say, like, there's a lot that you can expect. Now, as Will mentioned, they spend a lot of time in the wrestling ring, but this ain't wrestling focused. So I'm not going to go off the limb and say like the wrestling choreography is off the chain. You're getting crazy 5-star matches and whatnot, because it really was about the characters. It really was about, I would say, like the mental state of professional wrestling at the time, not just Dump, but everybody, because everybody's affected by all that's kind of happening. But they definitely have some wrestling in it, but it's by no means the focus. So to come in there and be very critical about, oh, it looks this and look this and look that, understand that we are seeing them from day one develop. So you will see things get polished over time, as well as you see people hone their craft, hone their style, get their looks, all that sorts of different things. So the development aspect of it is on point. The one thing I will say is a criticism to that is that you're not getting every chapter of everyone's development. You will see one person 1 minute be like kind of, still need a little bit of polishing, to the next time you see them like, whoa, did I miss something? And I think for the sake of time, even though they had significant time with every episode, I thought they nailed the pacing as well too. Even though you may say like, I feel like I may have missed something, I still think they made up for it, because once you do kind of resolve that and just allow you to be whatever time, I ain't gonna say like a time jump, but whatever they're focusing on at the time, that becomes the focus. You're not worried about what you missed or those little details that they didn't leave out. I don't think it was important to nail everything, because that's essentially what a biopic is. And I don't think they were aiming for that here. They
made it very clear in the description. It's semi-autobiographical. There is some liberties taken as you're watching it. It will become very clear which ones they are. But there's definitely, there's creative choices that are made. And that's honestly what I'm kind of most curious to see when this all comes out and people can start seeing it, is how people react to some of the creative choices that were taken with the narrative and the story construction for how they present this world.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, again, wrestling fans are coming here and be like, "Oh, that's not right. That's right. Whatever." This is a show for everybody, and that's how you want to brand things. You always want to ensure that everybody can be welcome, can find something from out of it that they like and enjoy. You don't want to lean too heavy in one direction because you're just limiting your audience and your demo. You don't want to do that. Now, I will say this, that in watching this, emotionally, I had a sense of like, because of with like the humor and then some of the moments, I mean, because there's definitely some epic cinematic moments in this. It kind of reminded me as a child initially in watching Power Rangers at times, because you think of those big payoffs and those big moments and whatnot, the build up to get those big fights. But as an adult, it truly reminds me of like those initial feelings when I first watched Cobra Kai, and then ultimately like the Rocky movies, where you know those big moments, they were going to build them up because you gotta have the viewers divided. You don't know what side, you don't know who's going to win, and even though it's focused on the villain, you're thinking like, could she turn out to be a good person after all? Right. Would she go through with it? What happens with Chika-san? They were friends. What's going to happen? Right. Like all those sorts of different things. I thought they did so well in doing so. So for the folks who's watching Cobra Kai, you know exactly what I mean, because you just never know exactly how things are going to end, especially when they're building up sort of, you know, multiple people where they can go either way. And then Rocky, I think, is like really the blueprint for that measure of storytelling. The last thing I really want to say is, I thought, Will, they did a hell of a job protecting the business.
Oh, yes. They made sure that there is some blurry areas in there, and that is part of what I was talking about earlier with some of the creative choices they made. Yes, there is some very blurred lines and some very blurry areas where they purposely, and I'm curious in some ways if that came from Dump wanting to, you know, protect some mystique, some kayfabe, if you will, of, you know, keeping the legend what it is. So, yeah. Oh, yes. Folks, when you watch, you will know. You will know. In every episode, in fact, you will know. There's a constant theme throughout this.
Yep. It's deathmatch heavy, as Will mentioned, the brutality, the gore, and all that other stuff. So be prepared to feel uneasy at times. And for your horror fans, like, there's a constant sense of dread. And on the other end, because of what's happening with these matches, you're seeing the audience reactions, and that will also play a part into your emotions as well too. Seeing the reaction that they're able to create, which is the beauty of pro wrestling, because when you can get the fan to be invested emotionally in that extent, you know you're doing something right. And because this is layered in the sense of it being a show, we're seeing a match, so you can instantly have that direct emotion there, but then you're seeing the audience, and then you're getting emotion there. And then obviously there's just the overall in story that's kind of happening. So they really do a fantastic job in yanking your tie in all sorts of directions with emotions here. And the poor refs, man. I really need to know how much the refs were getting paid then, and if they were unionized or whatnot, because the refs, man, geez,
they had no hope. There was no hope for those refs to control these ladies.
Oh my goodness. Every match is like, oh, not the ref again. But I will say this though, for episode 5, to prepare for episode 5, go out there and watch Dump's hair versus hair match, and also watch the retirement match. They did a really good job in studying these matches and bringing them to life. I watched it side by side, and there is moments where it almost felt in sync, that it was a little trippy. They really nailed it with some of the camera cuts, the commentary. Obviously, the series has additives to really, for cinematic purposes and whatnot, but they really nailed a lot of it. That you could tell that they took their diligence in not only wanting to do this show, but doing it right, having the right folks invested. Again, Dump with the co-sign for this as well too. And I think this is something that not only are they proud of, but I think as a fan who may come in here and want to be overly critical, I think you can have reassurance that, yeah, there's definitely some as you mentioned, some liberties here because of the series. But when it came down to the craft and where they studied, you can see the inspiration, you can see the homework. There's nothing to fear on that note. This did not make a strong left turn to Albuquerque. They stayed on track, and I think it's definitely worth a watch on that note. So that's my closing thoughts on that. What about you, Will? What's your last little bits?
I am in agreement. I mean, I think we've hit all the major things that we can get into without like getting any, we don't want to be tipping the hand of stuff with this, forthcoming in a few weeks on Netflix. Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is if you're a fan of wrestling, I think you'll definitely want to check this out. If you're not a fan of wrestling, there's still a lot of reason to check this out. I'm very curious to see the reception it gets from different audiences. And, yeah, I mean, it's a big recommendation for me. I was very pleasantly surprised coming from that trailer and being like, okay, I hope this lives up to the sizzle it seems to be putting out in the trailer, and it more than did. It more than did. So yeah, very, very pleasantly surprised by the Queen of Villains. A heck of a show.
Well, there it is, folks. The Queen of Villains comes to Netflix September 19th. 5 parts. Hour plus each episode. Certainly, as we will say here at Big O Built Media, they were co-signing that this one is a watch. But stay tuned, because there's definitely some things we want to get into the nitty-gritty with this. So we'll stay tuned for additional commentary for this once this releases. Don't want to spoil anything for you yet, but we definitely will have more to talk about this one very soon. So we definitely appreciate you all checking this review out. Stay tuned for more content, movie reviews, interviews, and so on here at Big O Built Media very soon. Thank you for watching, folks.